Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. Tensions continue to ramp up in northern British Columbia as Wet'suwet'en Hereditary Chiefs face off against the RCMP over access to Coastal GasLink's pipeline construction site. As APTN's Todd Lamoran brings us the latest developments.
RCMP have blocked a service road to the Wet'suwet'en camp and created what they are referring to as an exclusion zone. On Sunday, some Wet'suwet'en Hereditary Chiefs unsuccessfully attempted to enter.
I wonder what passes that you guys have to put up.
Yeah,
I think they've used it before. Maybe in the 60s, 50s? Do you remember that?
What was that?
The Indigenous had to use a pass to get off the reserve. This seems really similar.
Inside the camp, there is concern and tension. Carla Tate says land defenders are praying and in ceremony.
We're peaceful people here. We're unarmed. So, of course, we're feeling nervous given the authorization to use lethal overwatch on unarmed people here last year during the raid. So there's some apprehension for sure.
Tate is referring to this incident from 1 year ago when RCMP stormed barricades and arrested 14 people. But Tate says Wet'suwet'en and their allies remain upbeat.
There is still that moral underpinning about what we're doing here and confidence that we're doing the right thing for our future generations and at the direction and with the support of our Wet'suwet'en Hereditary Chiefs.
BC Premier John Horgan, seen here at the AFN's Chiefs meeting just last month in Ottawa. On Sunday, he made a definitive statement about building the pipeline to carry liquefied natural gas.
There are agreements from the Peace Country to Kitimat with Indigenous communities that want to see economic activity and prosperity take place. All of the permits are in place for this project to proceed. It will be proceeding.
Meanwhile, Tate insists Wet'suwet'en don't want any kind of escalated conflict.
We want this to see a peaceful resolution. We want our rights and title acknowledged and free prior informed consent obtained. This is a question of title here. It should not be, reconciliation doesn't come at the barrel of an assault rifle.
Unconfirmed reports on social media and photos indicate a large RCMP presence in nearby Burns Lake, despite calls from the United Nations and Amnesty International to de-escalate the situation and respect Wet'suwet'en rights. Todd Lamoran, APTN National News, Ottawa.
In Regina, Saskatchewan today, a man was given a 2-year sentence for a break-and-enter that occurred in 2015. But his arrest this past December, which was recorded on security camera, was violent, and he was badly injured. Advocates and family members of Rocky Lone Child say Regina police used too much force during his arrest. APTN's Priscilla Wolf has more.
The Saskatchewan Coalition Against Racism and advocate Carmel Crowchild held a media conference on the arrest of Rocky Lone Child. This video surveillance taken in December shows officers arresting him. During their arrest, Lone Child suffered a punctured lung.
One beating is one beating too many of Indigenous people being arrested by the Regina Police Service. How about working with the Indigenous people of your city and speak the truth instead of concealing with misleading media statements so that it ignites the racism in other ethnic groups of Regina.
Bob Hughes with the Saskatchewan Coalition Against Racism adds some officers need to be assessed whether they are fit to be on duty.
There is no defense for the violence, the kind of violence that was displayed in that arrest. Punishments are for the courts to decide. And Chief Bray, I know just recently talked about them hiring a psychologist, and I would suggest, that is very important. It is very important to know whether officers are fit for duty.
APTN contacted the Regina Police Service for comment. They emailed us a response stating they won't comment on the case as this is now being investigated by Public Complaints Commission. In December, Lone Child was charged for possession of meth and resisting arrest. He also had an outstanding warrant out for his arrest for break-and-enter charge in 2015. Today, Lone Child was sentenced to 702 days for the break-and-enter charge. And because he failed to appear in court on April 29, 2019, he received an additional 180 days. Priscilla Wolfe, APTN National News, Regina.
An independent investigation has been called into the arrest of a Bella Bella man and his 12-year-old granddaughter at a Bank of Montreal in Vancouver. The Office of the Police Complaint Commissioner announced the investigation into the Vancouver Police on Tuesday. The Commissioner also announced it was in the public's interest to have the investigation done by an agency outside of the Vancouver Police. So the Delta Police Department will be the service looking into the incident. The arrest and detention of Mac Johnson and his granddaughter took place on December 20th of last year when they tried to open a bank account. The federal government has until February to make a decision on the proposed Teck Frontier Mine in northern Alberta. Well, there has been a lot of protest against the project. All 14 Indigenous communities in the area signed an agreement for it. As the deadline nears, the Fort McKay Métis explain why they want the project to go ahead. Tamara Pimentel reports.
This was originally my granny's cabin.
This cabin has been in Felix Fakeney's family for generations. It's located in the heart of the oil industry, just north of his home, the Fort McKay Métis community in northeastern Alberta. This is where his trap line is, and it's surrounded by construction for an oil project.
You know, it's within walking distance of the cabin, and you know, it is what it is. That's what consultation is for.
Fakeney says consultation is key, and this is a reality of living in oil and gas central.
We knew it was coming, and we were talked to about it, and so there's still talks going on and still being consulted. So, yeah.
Do you ever fear that it's going to affect your trap line at all?
It already has, right? But that's why we work with each other.
The oil sands mining isn't going anywhere. If they were to turn the oil off tomorrow, I mean, my community would nearly starve.
Ron Quintel is president of the Fort McKay Métis. The community is remote but prospering.
We've been a driving force behind the economy of the fur trade, and now within the oil sands, our elders and our people built a lot of the existing mine sites that are, better part of 30, 40, 50 years old.
Located almost an hour north of Fort McMurray, plans for economic growth are in place. Spaces for a new fire hall, a gas station with a Tim Hortons, and new homes are all set aside. And Quintel says it wouldn't be possible without the oil and gas industry. But in order for this type of development to continue, Quintel says the proposed Teck Frontier Mine needs to go ahead.
My job as a leader is to make sure that I'm doing everything in my power to enhance the quality of life, and that's what I'm going to do.
This is where the project would be built. It's promised to provide thousands of new jobs and $70 billion in revenues to the Canadian government. It's expected to produce about 260,000 barrels of bitumen a day. Community social worker Melanie Heroux says revenues from the industry helps Fort McKay overcome barriers.
There wouldn't be any employment without industry. That's one of the main sources of employment for the community members. The community is considered remote or rural from mainstream society. So even accessing transportation to Fort McMurray for basic needs such as groceries is very challenging.
Chief Executive Officer Dwayne Roth said the project isn't only important for Fort McKay, but for the entire oil industry.
The whole region needs a construction project to go ahead. But right now, our oil is landlocked. We really need a more pipeline capacity in order to bring back some economic stimulus in this region. The Frontier project definitely needs to go ahead.
Well, Teck has made an agreement with all 14 Indigenous communities in the area.
So shame on the Canadian government! Shame.
Many groups have been protesting against the project, claiming the mine would disrupt the entire ecosystem. and species like caribou, and one of the last remaining herds of wood bison in the area.
If Canada wants real truth and reconciliation, they need to reject the Teck Frontier Mine, and they need to uphold Indigenous rights and take real action on climate.
Our community needs to continue to grow. We have needs, we have concerns.
Quintel says Teck is taking Indigenous concerns into consideration by setting aside a portion of land for the bison and working with elders.
I refuse to apologize, and I have no ill will against anybody. But you know what, from my perspective, if my community took a stand and we believe that we need to endorse this project, then that's the stand I'm going to take as a leader.
Quintel says the consultation with Teck has been unparalleled by any other oil sands component. The federal government has until mid-February to make a decision whether or not the project will go ahead. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Fort McKay.
Quebec Court of Appeal has ruled against a uranium mining company in what the Grand Council, the Crees, are calling a great victory. On Tuesday, the court ruled against Stratego Resources, who proposed construction of a uranium mine on Cree territory. Stratego was denied permission to build its mine in 2013, partly due to the lack of support from the Cree nation of Mistissini, because of the risk uranium extraction could pose on the region's watershed. Bill Namagoose of the Cree Nation government says the decision sends a strong message to mining companies.
The fact that we were able to overturn their project, I think those mining companies now will go home. I hope they go home, because Crees will not allow uranium mining in their territory. And they know that we were able to in effect, kill their project like we did with Stratego. So it's a lesson for other mining companies to not to tangle with the Crees.
Day school survivors can now apply for compensation. We'll speak with the lead plaintiff in the case after the break. Here's a look at Wednesday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. -2 with snow for Halifax, 8 below and sunny for St. John's. -23 in Nain with snow, sunny skies and 15 below for Cartwright. 0 and snow in Montreal, snow and -4 for Quebec City. +1 for Toronto, 0 with snow in Ottawa. Flurries and -8 for Thunder Bay, 12 below with flurries for Sioux Lookout. Sunny and chilly, -31 for Churchill, -22 in God's Lake and Norway House. More snow and 23 below for Winnipeg, -22 in Dauphin. Sunny skies and a chilly low of 29 below in Saskatoon. 1 degree cooler for North Battleford. -33 in Stony Rapids, 32 below in Uranium City. Welcome back. They've been waiting since 2009 and finally got some good news this week. Survivors forced to attend day schools can now apply for compensation. These are Indigenous students who suffered the same abuse as students living in residential schools. Survivor and lead plaintiff Margaret Swan is here to tell us more. Margaret, thanks for joining us. How are you feeling now that the claims process for compensation is underway?
Well, miigwech for the opportunity, firstly, and obviously I am very pleased that we're finally getting some closure to this and that this case is moving forward. So I feel really good about that. Miigwech.
What does this mean for yourself and an estimated 140,000 other day school survivors?
Well, my hope is that one of the biggest thing that will come out of this is that we will take bigger steps in our healing journeys from that very sad past. So that's the biggest deal, is that we'll take bigger steps in healing, and when we're doing that, our children and our families will have a healthier future. That is such a big deal, considering there has been so much damage caused by the schools that the government forced upon our people.
For those who don't know, can you tell us a little about how day school survivors differ from residential school survivors?
I believe the biggest and only difference was the fact that day schools, we were allowed to go home at night. Indian residential schools, they were kept away from their families for weeks and months and years on end, and they weren't able to go home at all.
So survivors have 2 years to apply for compensation, with that process closing July 13th. How will you get the word out?
Well, there's different things being done with through the lawyer's office, through Deloitte, through Moccasin Telegraph, social media. We're fortunate that in this day and age, there's so many ways where we can do that. And the word's already out there. There's calls coming in, not only to myself, but other Indigenous service providers that do different things within our province here in Manitoba that are helping people to start to look at filling out the forms, and also helping to support and ensure people have services to deal with their emotional well-being.
Right. Well, Margaret, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks so much for taking some time for us today.
Thank you for the opportunity, Miigwech.
A new episode of Face to Face airs tonight. Our guests are comedians Gits Crazy Boy and Tito Ybarra. The two most recently teamed up to create the satirical group, the Indigenous Pipeline Council. Ybarra says satire is a great way to get your message out.
You can share your views and your point and make your point in a way that's not so confrontational. I think if you can make somebody laugh at the things that they do, like recognize, say, hey, man, I do act like that. You know what I mean? It's a very humbling thing for somebody to be able to laugh at themselves. A lot of times, I think we don't get past our fears and our initial anger, our initial frustration with somebody that doesn't agree with us. So humor can kind of you can get past that a little bit with humor.
Still to come, we'll hear from a family directly affected by the fires in Australia. Stick around. Here's the rest of Wednesday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. 34 below for Fort Chipewyan, minus 33 in Grand Prairie, minus 24 in Medicine Hat and Lethbridge, 32 below in Red Deer. Plus 3 with snow for Victoria and Tofino. Rain-snow mix and plus 1 in Vancouver. Minus 34 for Dease Lake, sunny, and 27 below for Prince George. Minus 37 in Dawson, 36 below for Whitehorse. Minus 34 in Fort Liard and Trout Lake. Minus 33 in Yellowknife. 24 below with snow for Sax Harbor. 17 below with snow in Paulatuck. Welcome back. We've seen the devastation caused by Australian bushfires. Animals killed, land ravaged, houses totaled. One couple, however, is contending with the destruction of their farm, a gathering place used by Indigenous peoples in Australia for millennia. Lindsay Richardson has that story.
But yeah, this is 3:30 in the afternoon.
The videos defy explanation, but in Australia, this is reality.
We've been smelling bush smoke every day, like every day since November. I was just saying to my mom, I'm like, I almost forget what fresh air smells like. Some days it's really thick and strong, and other days it's just a mild scent of it, but it's always there.
By the time Candace Scott Moore took this video on New Year's Eve, 40% of the Shoalhaven County was ablaze, shooting noxious flames high enough into Earth's atmosphere they were picked up by satellite images. By January 1st, news came that a strong wind, a southerly, was steadfastly approaching. Her husband Richard knew it would get bad.
Once these winds pick up, there is no way you can stop this fire. You could see the smoke coming over the mountain. I gave it about a week before it was going to hit our farm.
At home in Nowra, they prepared, donning gas masks, dousing the property with water to extinguish falling embers. But the flames were fierce as the fire approached the couple's 1,100-acre family property.
And even at night, if you're standing outside at night, you can just see the orange glow on the mountaintops in the distance.
In happier times, the Illaroo farm was home to a thriving ecology, the place where Richard's ancestors from Australia's Yuin Nation hunted, gathered, and performed ceremony, where Richard now imparts lessons about Indigenous culture and dance.
That land has taught me a lot. It was one of my greatest teachers.
For Candice Ojibwe from Kettle and Stony Point First Nation in Ontario, the farm taught lessons about the lay of the land down under.
And now I can identify tracks. I can identify the animals that are there, the different bird species, even when it comes to plants, trees, some of the bush medicines that Richard has taught me.
For the couple, the property is enshrined in memory as the setting for a surprise proposal. Finding the words back then seemed easy.
There's nothing that can...
But Richard still struggles to describe the devastation in the charred exclusion zone that was once his nation's pride and joy.
This is the first time I've experienced something so bad, so out of control. It was a shock to me. From a green, lush bush and forest to just blackness, just burnt trees.
Not a leaf left on the trees. On our tractors, the tires, literally, there are no tires. They melted off completely. The alloy rims on our trucks have melted, and you can...
They run like water on the ground. That's how hot it was.
By the first week of 2020, almost 90% of the county had burned. By the second week, however, the focus is shifting to rebuilding.
This used to be a house right here.
The Scott Moores have started a GoFundMe page seeking $250,000 to start the cleanup. It will take millions to restore.
Money means nothing. It's all about looking after each other. So things will continue.
With family support, they're holding faith the farm will flourish again, once again opening its doors to youth curious about Indigenous culture. While waiting for more rain or an hourly flyover by a water bomber, Candice says she thinks of home, of the Canadians in the relief effort. The ones Richard thanks and welcomes now in his language.
Through the mother, thank you for our law and culture and respect. May the four grandfathers from the four wind directions look over all of you and protect you, and thank you for your protection. There's a lot of healing. There's a lot that needs to be done.
As smoke clears and fire turns to ember, the legacy of Illaroo Farm ignites new hope for the Indigenous peoples who call the island home.
It will never be what it was again, but it's hope for something new.
Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
Quite a story and visuals there. That's your APTN National News for this Tuesday. Stick around. Face to Face is up next. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. See you back here tomorrow.